So my name is Akosh. I'm the CEO of Airtime. It's a user engagement platform empowering product teams to validate user needs very, very fast. And today I'll be talking to Nikki about the traps of continuous research. And don't worry, we're not going to leave you hanging. She's also going to give you some tools to overcome them and to deal with them. At the end of the discussions, we'll have about 15 minutes, so you can ask any questions from Nikki and her mind. I urge everyone in the audience to, if you have a question during our discussion, feel free to put it in the chat. It won't be forgotten. I will pick it up. Okay. A couple of more things. I'm gonna copy in the chat a few links. These links are Nikki's and my LinkedIn. In case you have any questions that you wanna throw at us during or after the webinar, that's where you can do it. You also get a link to Airtime to check out all the nice and beautiful things that we're doing and user validation. Any feedback is more than appreciated. And of course, the link to Nikki's baby, the User Research Academy, which he founded. And I think that's a nice segue for me to drop the mic in a virtual sense and hand it over to Nikki to give a short introduction to everyone who's here in the audience.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm super excited to be here to talk about some topics that are get me quite fired up. So it should be interesting and fun to chat today. But yeah, just a little bit about me really quickly. My name is Nikki. I've been a user researcher for about 10 years now. And I've worked in the B2B, B2C space. I've also done freelancing and consultancy. So I've seen a lot of stuff, enjoyed a lot of times as a researcher, and encountered a lot of struggles as a researcher. And I've worked in both very, very big companies and very teeny tiny ones, which are my absolute favorite. And a little bit outside of the research sphere, I live in Jersey, but not the new one, the original one, which is off the coast of France, but technically part of the UK, depending on who you ask. And I have 2 cats, a dog, which you might hear all of them. I have 11 koi fish as well, which hopefully we won't hear anything from them. That would be very interesting. And yeah, just super excited to be here.
Amazing. Thanks a lot. And what do you say, because we're already like 7 minutes into the session, why don't we just plunge in the deep water and talk about the topic of today, which is traps of continuous research. Now, continuous research is something that we all crave to do, and it's inspiring and it's invigorating. When I think about continuous research, I'm not thinking about traps. And I'm just curious, what kind of traps are there that we should look out for?
So let me preface this by saying, okay, actually, let me take a huge step back and let's define what continuous research is versus sometimes what people can think about it as. So the way that I personally define continuous research is by it's a constant stream of user research projects that are happening across a quarter, a half year, a year. And it's this kind of rolling program that continuously happens where you're continuously conducting user research. And now when it comes to that topic, right? So we have either one research project after the next, we have a really big research project or several big research projects going on one after the next. I am 100% all for that. I love a good continuous research kind of program, and I've done them before at many organizations. The trap is when we start to think about continuous research as chatting with customers. So a lot of times what I see is like, oh, let's constantly talk to customers, okay? Which is somewhat of a good idea. All right. Well, we'll say yes to that part. But what I've seen happen and where I've seen continuous research fall into a trap is when it is like, let's have 3 calls a week with customers. And unfortunately, sometimes what that can lead to is 30-minute calls with no goals, no note taking, no synthesis, no tying back to like any sort of particular objectives or outcomes or anything like that. We are just going out and just chatting with people without much intention behind it. And that's where I kind of take, and that's where I see continuous research happening sometimes, is within that particular space. And I think that that can be actually rather detrimental, both to like an organization and like making decisions, as well as to user research, because there is kind of, for me at least, a pretty big gap between, okay, let's do continuous research projects. It doesn't mean they have to be like 9 years of work. Like they can be lean, but there is a gap between that and just like constantly chatting with users in a more casual, relaxed way.
Got it. Got it. So if I talk to like three customers a week, and what is it what can you go a bit deeper into the negative consequences of if I don't have those research goals, if I don't have the questions, but I'm having casual chat? What's the worst thing that could happen? It's probably more than just me wasting my customers' time and my own time.
Yeah. So the thing that I tend to see happen is something like just a lot of confirmation bias, right? So we tend to go into these or I've seen people go into these casual conversations with like, they're like, ooh, I have an idea for a feature. And so then they'll go into these conversations with users and be like, hey, how much would you pay for this? Like, when would you use this? Like, would you love this? Would it be great for you? Would it help you? Like, really like leading kinds of questions that are a little bit more steeped in that confirmation bias world, where we're hoping that our baby of an idea is loved by everybody, right? So when we don't actually put the rigor behind the research, it can kind of fall apart. And goals really help with that, because they force us to be more intentional about what we're asking. Right. So if we don't have any sort of goal, like if we're just going in and we're like, oh, I had an idea for a feature, let's talk to the customers about this feature idea this week, right? You will have a higher tendency, especially if you're not a trained user researcher, to go in and ask more biased and leading questions, right? Versus if you have this goal, which is more about understanding how people think about a problem, right? And then seeing if your solution fits into that problem space, then you're more likely to ask open-ended and less biased questions. So rigor can slip a lot when you don't think through these kinds of conversations.
The topic I
Cool.
wanted to dig into
Yeah.
is related to like research goals and research questions, and I think that's something that you could elaborate on a little bit. Like, how do I come? What are good research goals, or what's the measure of a good research goal, and how many research goals should we have? I'm going to leave the stage to you, but just to help us orientate a little bit in this space.
So my number one piece of advice to anybody literally doing anything is start with the goals of it and work backwards, or start with like the outcome that you're working with or wanting, and reverse engineer or engineer the study. So the reason that I say that is because sometimes what tends to happen is I'm a user researcher over here hanging out. My stakeholder comes to me and is like, all right, we need to understand people's needs. So let's do a survey. Right. So usually I get approached with a methodology in mind already. And I have to go, wait. What are we trying to accomplish through this survey? Because your research goals, when you really are intentional about them, they set the scene for who you're going to recruit, the methodology, what type of synthesis you're going to do, and the deliverable that's coming. So like literally snowball effect, they are the most important things that you could set up for the success of your project. There have been many times in the beginning of my career that I went forward without any sort of goals, right, in mind. And those projects were not successful because we ended and like nobody knew what the point of the research was, and it made writing a report really hard when you like have no goals in mind. And it also made choosing methodologies really difficult. And my research just kind of like sank. Certainly didn't swim or excel in the slightest. So what I mean by goals are essentially like what information or what are you trying to achieve by the end of that study? Like, what information is it that you need to have answered by the end of that study for everybody to say, okay, our risk has been reduced and our decision making has become easier, and you've like potentially narrowed the scope for some solutions, right? So let me try and give a quick example to make it a little bit easier. I'm really books on plans. So I worked at a travel organization, a travel company, and we were a ticketing platform, right? And what happened is we didn't have like that much of an understanding about our users, right? So constantly we had this gap in knowledge about like who are users, like what are they doing on our platform, how are they navigating, what are their pain points, and like at first my PMs came to me and they were like, hey, we need personas. And I was like, love a good persona project. Like, sure, let's go. But then I was like, wait, Nikki, think about the goals. Like, so like, what is it that we actually want to get out of this? And so I sat down with my PMs and I was like, okay, what are we looking for as like an outcome? What are we trying to achieve with this research? And they started listing off like kind of like outputs that they wanted. So top 5 goals, they wanted to know how people move through the product, right? They wanted to understand how people interacted with it, where it was confusing, where it was a problem, how they thought about moving through it, how they thought about competitors compared to that product. And I was like, I don't think that we need personas for this, because the outputs, never once did you say to me, I want a persona where I understand the needs, goals, and pain points of this particular persona. And so what I did is I took their outputs and I said, okay, we want to discover the 5, like, let's say the top 5 pain points that people are having on our platform that they encounter. We want to identify how they think about competitors compared to our product, right? And we want to uncover like how they navigate through our product. So what is like kind of like their step-by-step of when they're booking travel, right? So those were 3 goals that I had identified. And I use like the phrases or the words like discover, identify, uncover, because they tend to be more open-ended. I usually try not to do yes or no goals. I try and do more like open-ended goals. And so with that, I was like, oh, we should do like a walk the store interview where they're actually walking us through the last time they were on our platform, and we can really understand like how they're interacting, how they're navigating, what they're thinking about, where the competitors come into place, and like what their pain points are. And that just set the tone for the entire rest of the study.
Now, between the goals, the research goals, and then the outcome,
Yeah.
there's a like an important part, which is how do I ask the questions in a way that I can uncover like insights or nuggets for these research goals. Do you have any like approaches, frameworks, something that helps you to come up with good questions? And I also ask this because I talk to a lot of either like founders in early stage companies or like seed stage companies, and one of the most common topics or pain points that I hear is that how do I know that I'm asking non-biased questions? How do I make sure that I don't have a blind spot? And so like how to ask questions, it's an important point, and people like realize it. It's not easy.
Yeah, it is very difficult to. So when I started as a user researcher, I asked the worst questions. I asked future-based questions like, what would you use this for? Would you like this product or this feature? I asked really like shallow, like yes, no questions of like, do you like this? Like those kinds of questions. And we're all guilty of it at some point. Like it just is what it is until you learn, right? And it can be a really tough skill set to get used to, but The great news is that certain frameworks are applicable beyond just a user interview. So you can use these kinds of questions like when you're talking to colleagues, when you're having like difficult conversations. I use them with friends and family. Like they're just really, they're quite wonderful. And so the framework that I use is like the TED-W framework. And each letter stands for a phrase or a word that helps translate your questions into more open-ended ones. Because the entire point of research, I'm talking now more so like discovery or generative research, is you are meant to uncover a specific memory or event or experience that somebody had, because that is really rich data, right? So I see a lot of times it's like, what's a pain point you have, for instance? While that's an okay question, like it's shallow. It's like one word answer or a sentence answer. And if you instead take the TED-W framework and apply that, so the T stands for tell me more about or talk me through. The E stands for explain. The D stands for describe, and the W stands for walk me through. Okay. So let's take that. What's a pain point? What's one of your pain points, or what's a problem, or what are your, actually, let's take a worse one. So what are your problems with the platform? Okay. So let's take that into TED-W. So describe the problems you've encountered on the platform. Okay. So described is an indicator. And what these kinds of phrases or words do is they tell your participant how you want them to respond. So if I ask you, what are the pain points? You're going to list them out. If I tell you describe, you are going to go and describe them, because that is what I'm telling you to do. And I will also say a big mistake that I do see, and I just, I've been married to my husband for quite some time. We've been together for 5 years, and he's a senior director of product. And so I've always been like really pushing user research into his mind. And I even saw him today because he was helping some or thinking about some user research related stuff. So describe the problems you've encountered on our platform. So if we have problems, then we have multiple things that we have to think about. Again, generative discovery-based research is about uncovering a particular experience or memory. Okay, that's where you're going to get really deep and really rich insights. So describe the number one problem you've encountered on our platform. And there you have putting this, these more shallow questions into this more open-ended, non-leading kind of phrases, and then getting specific about those particular phrases. So describe the number one problem you've had on our platform. Or if you want to take future-based questions, so would you use this? Tell me about a time when you used something similar, right? So we always look to the past, because past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior.
A last question from my side before I open the floor for our amazing audience who's like extremely active, and I really appreciate that. And so my last question is, if we like take a 1 hour interview with a customer, like, can you give a ballpark of how many questions we should prepare with? Is there a ballpark that makes sense?
So for each goal that you have, write down 2 questions. So imagine, yes, because what you're going to be doing is, so if we follow that rule, you should be talking 15% of the time, and the user should be talking 85% of the time. Sorry, the participant should be talking 85% of the time. Your goal within that is you ask that big question. Let's describe the number one problem that you've encountered on our platform, right? And let's take a pain point that has come up often in my work, such as with travel, comparing prices. So our platform did a crap job of comparing prices between like how you could travel, right? There were multiple ways to get to this place, and there were multiple prices associated with those ways. And we did a really terrible job of showcasing that, right? So somebody says to me, oh, it makes me really frustrated when I can't compare the prices, and I have to like look on the competitor and da da da. So what you do is you take something out of what they say and you just follow up with it and say, oh, what do you mean by frustrated? Okay. Oh, well, I mean that it took a lot of time for me to go and do this. And then I ended up comparing other prices in other places, and I had 50 tabs open. And then I ended up going to the competitive product because they had a cheaper price or were showing me a cheaper price. And then I lost some trust in your platform. Oh, interesting. Can you tell me more about losing trust in our platform? Right. So the questions you write are like the opening scene of the act, right? And what you're doing is you're following up with that person based on what they're saying. And when people ask me like, how do I know what to follow up on? I always say, take subjective language, because what you're trying to do is you are trying to create a shared understanding between you and the participant. So when somebody says that they are angry, it can mean a lot of different things. They could have reacted in 50,000 different ways that are probably different than how you might react. Or when somebody says that they are frustrated, when somebody says that they are sad, when somebody says that they are annoyed. So take those subjective words or subjective phrases and try to understand them more deeply. So try to identify what they say and anything in that sentence that you're like, ooh, I'm not actually sure what that means to that person. Then you follow up by asking, what do you mean by, or like, tell me more about what you mean by, or describe what you mean by, explain what you mean by, right? Still using that TED-W framework. So you can lean on that if you're, I know I was really crappy at like follow-up questions for a while. I took some improv classes, which really helped me actually.
So I'm going to go to the audience and some of the questions that I picked up from the thread. If any of you have further questions, please do post them. This is your chance to ask Nikki. How to cut through the deadlock that we don't know our personas. Then what do? Let's do some research. But who are you going to interview?
Yeah.
Because we don't know who our personas are. So it's a loop. Where's the way out of that?
Yeah. So for that, that's a really, really great one. Who are your competitors? Who are your competitors, right? So who are people who are using your competitor products? Everybody has a competitor. Trust me. I remember there was like some tax software that was like, we don't have a competitor. And I was like, yeah, literally like Excel is your competitor. Like, and like, I remember as well, we had, I was like on a hospitality platform and they were like, oh, we don't have a competitor for this particular product. And I was like, you do, it's a pen and paper, right? Everybody has a competitor. Everybody has a process that like every participant has a process that they're currently using, and pain points associated with that, and unmet needs associated with it, and needs associated with it. So I highly, highly recommend looking at your competitive set and trying to understand who your competitors are within your space, and understanding, like trying to get a hold of them, which can be really hard to do. Recruitment in general, like, is, everybody hates recruitment. It's the worst. So it can be really hard, but I would go with like competitors. And also, this sounds horrible, but hey, we're all here because businesses exist. Who are your highest paying current customers? Right? Who are the customers that are generating the most revenue? Because those should probably be, and will probably be, your target audience until you either expand or understand the different nuances.
When do you decide when you do or do not act on these insights from a customer?
Yeah. So when it comes to insights from continuous research, I usually will do like a synthesis session every 5 customers. So I usually don't act on insights from a single customer. I wait to see if the insight is trending in terms of if it's been brought up multiple times within that continuous research. I will, I guess, wait for that. I do, so yeah, I do depending on how many people you're targeting to talk to, I do a synthesis session after every 5 to 7 to see what's new. And then you can just continue to build on that. So for your first 5 to 7 participants, you're going to find stuff. And then if you were to do 5 to 7 more, you're going to find more. And some things will gain more weight. Some things will gain less weight. There will be new things that come in, and then you'll do more. And again, the cycle just goes with that. So I would recommend every 5 to 7 participants doing kind of like a synthesis session to see the trends across the participants and continue adding to that knowledge base participant by participant.
Synthesizing continuous research, and is that any different from like the synthesis process on like a project-based research?
I'm a huge fan of affinity diagramming. So I usually just do that. So I will have like a board per participant, and it will be focused on what we were trying to accomplish from that conversation, which is why it's important to have goals, right? So if we were trying to, let's see, identify pain points, understand how people navigate through the product, and then understand like the competitors, I will synthesize based on that. So I synthesize based on the goals, and I use affinity diagramming and clustering for that. So I'd have one board per participant, looking at pain points, looking at how they navigate, and looking at like that competitor. So like how that gets triggered, and maybe also looking at like any unmet needs that come up. So do that per each participant. And then I take those 5 boards of the 5 most recent ones, and I bring them into a larger board, right? Where it's finding the trends across them. So if participant 1, 2, 3, and 4 all said, hey, comparing prices as a huge pain point, that's in that big board, and that starts to become a trend because multiple people are talking about it. And then I go on to the next 5 to 7 after we conduct those.
How do you salvage or make the best of a research step when you recognize you've inadvertently fallen into one of these traps? Any concrete examples of pivoting to get the best out of a poor research process after this?
Yeah, it's honestly like we all make mistakes. I have recruited the wrong people. I have done research without goals. I've asked terrible questions. I've gone into a prototype session with the wrong prototype. Like I've done many. I've broken GDPR. That was fun. So like I've made many mistakes. And I think that let me take one in particular. So I didn't properly define goals for one of my studies, which means that I didn't properly define exactly who we were supposed to talk to. So we were looking at how people, let's take how people travel, like how they get inspired for leisure travel, and then how they actually book it, right? And so what I decided to do is not be super intentional and thoughtful about this. So I was like, okay, like let's just recruit people who like have taken a leisure, like a holiday in the past, like 3 months, and talk to them. And so what happened is we recruited 15, 20 people. And the first 3 people were not the people who booked the trip. Their partners or friends or family or somebody else booked the trip. So my entire 90-minute conversation of talking about how they booked the trip is literally useless, right? So within there, what I did is I pivoted the conversation to kind of talk about more like anything that I could, like inspiration for travel, or, the last time they used our platform. If they did, one person was literally like, just like, I've never like used the platform really. And I like don't get inspired to travel. So I ended that session. I was like, bye, let's not talk for 90 minutes about nothing. But what I did is I recognized really early that I had made that mistake. And after those 3 people, where I was like, this is a fluke, I ended up saying, okay, pause. Unfortunately, this is going to mess up our timeline. It's totally my fault. I'm so sorry, but we need to pivot and confirm that the rest of the people who we said yes to did in fact plan the trip, and we found out that some didn't. So then we had to recruit for those who we had to drop out. So I think the big thing is like seeing where in the process you are failing as early as possible. So making sure to really think with like that intention throughout each step. And if you notice that there's something going wrong, being okay with saying like, pause, let's not waste any more time. Okay. Because like you could continue, but you're just going to end up wasting more time and energy from like yourself, your colleagues, and your participants. So if you see a problem, pause. If you see something, say something. Isn't that it? Pause and like try and pivot there. if you've gone through the whole process and you're like, shit, you know, our findings aren't actually applicable to what we planned on doing, right? So if there was just poor process, poor planning, the insights like aren't really applicable. What I would do is I would still write the report, at least if the insights are okay, even if they aren't applicable. I would try and find anything that was in there that would be relevant for the team, to help them in any way that they can, even if it's not about like that particular feature or that particular topic. I'd still pull those insights for them. And then I'd completely honest, I'd just redo the project with better planning and just take it as like, hey, this is a learning for everybody. Just try and embrace it as much as possible.
I'm going to pick up Sylvia's question. If you have any suggestion for a research plan in continuous discovery in terms of like schedule, sample size, delivery time, cycle, some sort of like a cadence, to paraphrase that.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of research plans because they lay out like the goals, the recruitment criteria, the methodology, and everything you're going to do. So what I like to do with continuous discovery is, I was kind of talking about it before. So with evaluative research, I used to be a part of a company that did it like once every 2 weeks. We had a continuous evaluative kind of program that was going on. So we had 7 participants every 2 weeks, right? We had set recruitment criteria, which means that the teams who applied to be in the slot for that particular week needed to be aligned with that recruitment criteria, because we couldn't do like, just because of the cadence of it, we couldn't do really niche recruitment. We had to do more general recruitment. So it was 7 participants within our one of our segments. That was our most common segment. And everybody would like slot themselves in ahead of time. And so let's say that it starts on the 23rd, right? That we have our sessions that week. So what would happen is, on this past Monday, I would have sat down with the designer and gone through like the prototype and everything and looked through it. We would have gone through questions. We would have done like dry runs. We would have made sure that everything makes sense. And all that time I would have been recruiting participants. And then that following week on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, 2 to 3 sessions each day. Thursday, synthesizing. Friday, ideation. So a little design sprinty, right? And then we would go into like the next one. So that's how that looks like. It doesn't have to be every 2 weeks. Start every month, and that's totally fine. When it comes to more discovery, like continuous discovery, I tended to do one big discovery project for every 3 months, right? You don't have to do it like that, but I like to do 20 to 25 participants. You could do it I also did it once every 2 months, continuous discovery, every 2 months, where we would have, I do more kind of go in the 3 months, because usually your recruitment is more difficult and recruitment can take a lot of time. So you can't really do like general recruitment. So I would do that recruitment and conducting and synthesizing and go, and then on to the next big project, conducting, recruitment, synthesizing, go.
Last question to you, Nikki. My intro to continuous discovery is with Teresa Torres' amazing book, Continuous Discovery Habits. However, her process seems so dense and needs many team members to be on board with the idea. Would you say continuous discovery is feasible for a solo researcher on a large team, or the other permutation of the question, for the only researcher?
I am usually a solo researcher, and I've never had a problem with continuous discovery. So yes, I say go for it. I think you can. The thing is when you're doing this continuous discovery as like a solo researcher, then I definitely look at something like 3 months, because if this is if this is all on you, this is a lot of work, right? So definitely think about your like your full process. And like, just because you're doing continuous discovery, like when I was doing continuous discovery, I did like a big persona, like discovery push over 3 months. I was also doing evaluative research. I was also doing hiring. I was also doing, like other random little initiatives for like my team. So it wasn't only what I was doing. Right. So, definitely like think about like longer timelines, and like be okay with those. What I would recommend is for that process, take that process and say, what can I leave behind and what can stay? Right. So when I did continuous discovery, like it was the some of the continuous discovery research that I did, I was completely on my own. So I leaned it out. Like I was like, all right, like here we go. I am going to do, I did debriefs after each session for myself rather than transcribing everything. Right. I know that there are transcription services and I know this is like old school, but I did like debrief sessions. So it's like a mini synthesis for that participant. And then I went and then I had like a lot of my participants after 5, all of these participants, I brought them over to that big board, but I had already done each participant in a debrief right after the session. So it made synthesizing easier. Right. So you totally can do it as a solo user researcher. Just be very careful of the time frame and continue to iterate and just make sure that the continuous discovery research that you are doing is applicable for your teams. So really, really make sure that they're going to use it, they care about it, that it's relevant for whatever like outcomes, like business outcomes or OKRs or metrics they're looking for. Because like I have done continuous discovery research and I've had that stuff sit in a Google Drive and just die, right? Like I have had insights that I think are the most wonderful things in the world, but they weren't relevant to the team at the time. So they just went away, or just like weren't cared about. So if you are doing it and you are alone, make sure, and people aren't like doing it with you, make sure that there is alignment on what you're doing and how it relates to the organizational goals or the team goals, right? Just to make sure that you're doing impactful research, because the worst thing that I have done is walk into a performance review feeling like I've done so much stuff and not being able to say what impact I've had on the organization and team.